make a graven image and go back to the ways of Egypt and be involved in all this immorality. In fact, Mitchell's been doing a great job on teaching 1 Corinthians. Mitchell, do you have 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 6 already? Do you have that handy? Because this is a reference where Paul mentions this incident as well. And as I think I mentioned 2 weeks ago, Josephus leaves this out in his detailed history of the Jewish people. He was so embarrassed about it. Go ahead, Mitchell. Read 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 6.
Now these things happened as examples for us, so that we would not crave evil things as they also craved.
Okay, and then verse 7.
Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and stood up to play.
Okay, so he says, these things are written for our example. You need to learn from your forefathers who just would not have the right kind of spirit and trust God, and who became idolaters. It's also fascinating to me that Aaron told the people, these are the gods. Isn't that odd? He uses the plural term there, that brought you out of Egypt. And then later on he says, we're going to have a feast the next morning unto Jehovah. But then they involve in all this revelry and all this, immorality in this feast that they said was to Jehovah. And when Jehovah tells Moses what they've done, he said they've made a molten image and they have worshiped it. See, they claimed they were worshiping Jehovah. It was a feast unto Jehovah, but God didn't accept it at all, of course, and said, no, they're worshiping the golden calf and they're just doing it in my name. Which goes back to what we've been studying in the Ten Commandments, where he says you should not misuse the name of the Lord thy God, for he who does such will not be held guiltless. You're not going to get away with that. You take something that is evil and you attach God's name to it. And that is one of the absolute worst sins that anyone can engage themselves in, even worse than murder, is to go out and do something awful and do it in God's name. That certainly gives the enemies of Jehovah an opportunity to blaspheme. And that's what Aaron does. And he goes along with the people, and they act like this is idolatrous immorality somehow or other is a way they can worship God. So God is just so filled with wrath. He's so long-suffering, but he says, I have had it with these people. And it's Moses, the Bible says, that stands in the breach and makes the difference. And so he reminds the people of this as he's getting ready to leave them, turn the reins of authority over to Joshua, and just begs them to learn from the mistakes of their forefathers and to be faithful. Even though they don't have a history of faithfulness, this next generation that lived in the wilderness will finally learn to trust in God and to be dependent upon him, at least as long as the memory of Joshua was retained by the people. Verse 16, and I looked, and behold, ye had sinned against Jehovah your God. You had made a molten calf. Ye had turned aside so quickly out of the way which Jehovah had commanded you. It's only been a couple of months since they actually witnessed the mighty voice of God and the manifestation of his appearance in their midst. Verse 17, I took hold of the 2 tablets and cast them out of my 2 hands and broke them before your eyes. I sometimes quip that, Moses is the only man who broke all the 10 commandments at once. But, I think it's fascinating that there are many ways in which Moses truly is a foreshadowing of Christ. We're told that Moses in Deuteronomy 18:18 told the people that you need to look down the road in your history where God will rise up someone among your own brethren who will be a prophet likened unto me. And anyone who will not hearken unto him shall be cut off. So that was one of the major verses that we find in the New Testament that is being used to try to convert the Jews. You reject Jesus, who was the prophet likened unto Moses, and you're going to be cut off. That's not acceptable. You've got to see that this is all a part of how Jesus is fulfilling the law, not destroying it. Moses himself testified of this Jesus And you're holding on to the law of Moses and rejecting the grace and truth of the gospel. But I think it's rather helpful to, I just want to pause here just for a minute. We often think about, and we've talked about ways that Jesus was a prophet likened unto Moses. But I think you can also learn things in contrast to Moses and Jesus, so that Jesus stands out as being far superior even to Moses. For example, the first plague was Moses doing what? Yeah, turning the water into blood. And what does it say after he did that? It says it brought death. Remember? The fish died and everything stank and people couldn't drink the water. So Moses turns the water into blood and it brings death. But what is Jesus' blood going to do? It's going to bring life. And in this very chapter, because of their sin, 3,000 people are going to die at the giving of the law. But of course, what's going to happen when the sermon is given in Acts 2? 3,000 people are made alive. So one brings life, the other constantly is this ministration of death. And I think this is rather interesting as well. I mean, both symbolically and literally, Moses broke the Ten Commandments. From its very inception, the law is broken. Is anybody going to be able to keep the Ten Commandments so that through the law of Moses they could have salvation? There's only one person that I know of who ever perfectly kept the law, and who was that? Jesus, right? And so Moses, kind of demonstrates that the law is going to be broken. This bond written in ordinances, which was always against you, because justification by law doesn't cut it for human beings who have an unbelievable propensity to sin and not keep the law. And James said, if you are guilty in even one point, you're what? You're guilty of them all. So Moses here breaks the Ten Commandments. And yet Jesus is going to come in his time, in his life, and be the only one to keep the law perfectly and break none of the commandments. Moses was from which tribe? He's a Levite. Remember, his brother Aaron is, of course, the Aaronic priesthood and a part of the Levitical priesthood. So Moses is a priest by birth. And he also is going to be the author of the Pentateuch, the Torah. I mean, he's a prophet if there ever was one. And he's going to be prophesying their future here in Deuteronomy. So he's a priest and a prophet. And even though he leads the children of Israel, he's not a what? He's not a king. Jehovah is their king, and he simply is God's mouthpiece. But Jesus is different. Jesus, though he's likened unto Moses, he's not a Levite. From what tribe is Jesus going to come from? Judah, and the scepter will not depart from Judah. So he's a part of the Davidic line, right? And he's also going to fulfill the promises of 2 Samuel 7, that the kingdom will be established and it will last forever. So that means that Jesus is in line to be born a king. And of course, he's a prophet, mighty in word and deed, the Bible says. But he's also a priest. He's a prophet, a priest, and a king, even though he's not a Levite. And there's a whole section of the Bible that explains how that came about. How can Jesus be a priest if he's not a Levite? Yeah, Psalm 110 says it's after the order of Melchizedek. There was a man who was a priest king, and he was from Jerusalem, the city of peace, the city that God had chosen and the place where God would put his name. So while Moses is the great lawgiver and the mediator, and Jesus is going to be similar to him in many ways as a great shepherd, Moses is a priest, and a prophet, but not a king. But Jesus is born first a king. He then becomes a prophet and then goes up to heaven to become our high priest after the order of Melchizedek. And both were good shepherds. Jesus said in John 10 and verse 4 that a good shepherd is someone who lays down his life for his sheep, a sacrificial person. And Moses is going to sacrifice greatly over and over again for the good of the people. If it had just been Moses alone, he could have gone into the promised land. But because of the people's sin, he was held back. And then later, on behalf of the people, because he's going to mess up and sin publicly, God needs to use him as an object lesson. That the people need to see that no one is above the law, not even you, Moses. And in this particular instant, when he makes atonement and he stands in the breach for the people as he asks for forgiveness, who's he going to offer up ultimately as the sacrifice here? Himself. Shows you Moses' great love. He doesn't ask that God overlook their sin. He knows that God is just. There has to be some payment. And he kind of stands in the breach. And he says, if you're going to send them to hell, if you're going to blot their name out of the book of life, then I'm going to go with them. I want to go with them. And it's like, whoa. And that's the part of this text that is just amazing to me. It just sends chills down my spine. That he's basically offering himself up as the sacrifice. Of course, God's not going to accept the sacrifice that he offers. And of course, the reason is that even if he could, it wouldn't have worked. Why? Because Moses was a sinner. He couldn't stand in the breach the way Jesus can, because once again, Moses was a lawbreaker, good man, righteous man, but not a perfect man, and not the perfect sacrifice. And so here we have foreshadowed the idea of someone standing in the breach, answering Job's cry for a mediator, someone to plead both the case of man and his dilemma and the problems that Job was going through. He wanted an umpire that could mediate between him and God. And Jesus is the ultimate answer. Moses shows his heart. And he's a great example for us, how he loves these idolatrous, wicked, murderous people. But God cannot accept his sacrifice, but he can accept that of Jesus. Because when he dies, he's sinless, and therefore he can accept his death as payment for everyone else's sin. And so I just find all of this just fascinating, the ways in which Jesus is superior to Moses, even though in many ways he is the new lawgiver, he is the new shepherd, he is the ultimate high priest, though he is not from the tribe of Levi. So think about that as we look at the rest of this tonight. And so we see here in Deuteronomy 10, verse 17, and I took hold of the two tables and cast them out from my two hands and brake them before your eyes. And I fell down before Jehovah as at the first 40 days and 40 nights, where I did neither eat bread nor drink water, because of all of your sin, which ye sinned in doing that which was evil in the sight of Jehovah to provoke him to anger. So, the people should have been the one that were so embarrassed about what had happened. They thought that Moses was never coming back. They said, what has become of him? You think they would be ashamed. But who is it that falls to his knees? It's Moses. It's like he's ashamed here about what they have done. And he says, verse 19, for I was afraid of the anger and hot displeasure wherewith Jehovah was wrought against you to destroy you, which they would have deserved, by the way. But Jehovah hearkened not unto me, but Jehovah hearkened unto me that time also. And Jehovah was very angry with Aaron to destroy him as well. Why would that be particularly appropriate? Yes, Cassandra? What did Aaron do here?
He was the leader of the people.
Yeah, he said, okay, grab your earrings and your nose rings and all this jewelry you've got and let's melt it down. I mean, he was the one who took an engraving tool and made this image of a golden calf. And Moses had left Aaron in charge. And so God was ready to destroy Aaron, who had been a false shepherd over Israel. And Moses has to make a separate prayer of intercession, asking God to forgive Aaron as the ultimate high priest and give Aaron another chance. Yes, Jennifer.
I just find that so amazing that Aaron stooped so low. It's hard for me to understand what was going on with him.
Called peer pressure. Anybody have any other ideas about Aaron? Just gave in to the people and the pressures of the moment. And Jehovah was very angry with Aaron to destroy him, but I prayed for Aaron also at the same time. And I took your sin, the calf which he had made, and burned it with fire, and stamped it, grinding it very small, until it was as fine as dust. And I cast the dust, therefore, into the brook that descended out of the mount, and he made them drink it. See, gold, of course, throughout history has been the way people have discerned value. It's scarce, it's beautiful, it's used in jewelry, it doesn't rust, it's used in coinage. And most people really think that jewelry that is like that is beautiful, and money, of course, can provide so much luxury and benefit to people. Seems pretty sweet. But God has them drink it. And I would know this, but the commentators tell me that it's extremely bitter when you take gold and you grind it into dust and you drink it. And so when they first came out of the wilderness, they came across bitter water, and they murmured because of the bitter water. And God said, you take a tree and you throw it into the bitter water, and it became sweet, and the people loved the sweet water. God's a master at being able to take things that are bitter and making them sweet. Sin should be bitter to us as it is bitter to God. But through the blood of Christ, he can make it sweet. And so this that they thought was so valuable and sweet to them, he made them drink it so that it was a bitter memory, just like the bitter herbs of the Passover meal will remind them of their bitter bondage. And he took their bitter bondage and he gave them sweet freedom, and then begged them not to abuse their freedom, and they did anyway. Seneca said, he is not free who is slave to his own lust, which is, of course, the problem of free men even today. So I thought that was a pretty good summary of what Moses told the children of Israel about this and why it was so important. Okay, we're having trouble here again with, you know what, this light here has turned yellow. Aaron, can you come up here and see what's going on? Having a little difficulty here with our PowerPoint. We still got the projector. What was it that when Moses decides to stand in the breach and try to mediate for the people and get God's forgiveness, what was it that he was concerned about And what was the basis of his argument as to why God shouldn't destroy the people? All right. Brother Simmons, yes. Go ahead.
Moses said that the Egyptians might hear of it, and that would be a strike against God not being able to keep his people.
Yeah, he's concerned about the reputation and the holiness of God. You know, the people had done these evil, idolatrous, immoral things in God's name. This is a feast unto Jehovah. And Moses turns around and says, and I don't want the Egyptians to hear about the children of Israel being destroyed in the wilderness. And they're going to blame you for that. And they're going to begin to say that you were not powerful enough to handle this properly. And I don't want that. I want your name to be glorified. So please don't do this, if for nothing else, that people are going to use this against you and your reputation. Is that a man who cares about God more than himself? I just think it's amazing that he says this, and even though they've corrupted themselves. So we got it worked out here? Okay. I hope we'll have all this set up for Andy Cantrell when he comes. I hope this isn't going to be a problem for him. Okay. All right, so they corrupted themselves. They turned aside quickly. And God says, I have seen this people, and behold, they are an obstinate people. Now then, let me alone, that my anger may burn against them, that I may destroy them. I will make of you a great nation. And he basically proposes the idea that Gershom could become the son of promise. 2 weeks ago, it was rather interesting. There was a line of people who lined up to talk to me after class last time. And it was because of the fact that in Genesis 48 and 49, there were all these specific promises given to the 12 sons of Israel about what land they would partake and what their futures would be like. He'd already made all these commitments to the descendants of the 12 sons of Jacob. So how could he have done this? And so it's kind of a dilemma. You know, I think Mitchell was saying that this is sort of like when God told Abraham to go up and offer up Isaac. You know, he never intended for him to go through with it, but it was a test. And maybe this is a test as well in a similar way. Because of the promises that he's already made, it appears that he's already committed and he couldn't do this and keep his own prophecies. Other commentators argue that God is omniscient and that God knew that when these prophecies were given and written down in Genesis 48 and 49 and in other places, that he knew that Moses would talk him out of this. And therefore, he'd give the prophecies knowing what was going to happen in the future. This whole idea of the foreknowledge of God just kind of makes my head hurt trying to think about all the implications of that and how it fits together. So, you know, I think it's a good point that at this particular time, he's already committed to the 12 tribes. And Moses actually brings that up when he argues with God, you don't go through with this because of what you've already promised. So I'm not really sure what the answer to that is, but one thing I'll say for sure is if this was some test for Moses, then Moses certainly passes the test. The test of true leadership is, are you really more concerned about the people than you? And if your real concern is for the people, you know, we need politicians today that are public servants, that truly are trying to serve instead of just line their own pockets or do things for their own reputation or their own benefit. Moses was that kind of leader. And he's selfless here. And he won't even consider this. And it just reminds me of the power of selfless prayer. Who else was involved in a selfless prayer that God was pleased with, and as a result, he received manifold blessing? Remember, Solomon was just given one wish. Isn't that interesting? One wish. He could have wished for a super long life. He could have wished for wealth. He could have wished for health. He could have wished for. Instead of those things, of course, he asked for wisdom, that he could be a good leader, because he was overwhelmed with the fact that he was going to be taking over from his father David. And God was so impressed with his desire to be a good king and to give him wisdom, that he not only gave him wisdom, but the things he didn't ask for. Probably the wealthiest man that ever lived, or at least right up there. And fame and power and glory and all these other things that he could have asked for that he didn't. So those things aren't inherently wrong. They can be a blessing from God. It's too bad Solomon let his heart be led away by the idolatrous women that he kept company with. It's really strange to me that the wisest man that ever lived died a fool because of his own pride. But wow. And so I think about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He says, "Not my will, but thine be done." So how does that relate to our own prayer life? I mean, let's be honest. When we think about our prayers, are we usually asking for blessings upon ourselves and upon our loved ones? There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I think that's in order. But are we really selflessly thinking about, what can I do, even if it hurts, to give you glory? What can I do to fulfill your purpose in my life, even if it means a lot of sacrifice on my part? What can I do to really fulfill my purpose? And when we ask God with pure hearts for things that do not personally benefit us, but instead benefit God's glory and others, those are the powerful prayers that make a huge difference. And I don't know about you, but that causes me a lot of introspection when I think about how much of my prayers are really for others versus for just blessings upon me and my family in this local church. Any thoughts about that? Moses. Okay, go ahead. Chris has his hand up in the back.
I guess my only comment was the selflessness. Every day, I find myself having to give my day over to God and abandon my best thinking, basically, because a lot of times my best thinking is selfish. And in my prayer life, also, I find that, if I start my prayers out of praying for others, and then but keeping it away from praying just towards my own selfish means, and that can mean a lot of different things, and I got to look really closely about what a selfish prayer can be, because, like you said, the church is something that maybe if I'm always praying for the church and spending that much time, that can be, I want the church to be healthy and happy, and there's some selfishness in that too. So.
Okay, sounds like you're growing spiritually, Chris. So that's good. Anyway, we talked about the special appeals that Moses made. He says, remember your special relationship with these people. The Egyptians would hear about it and gloat. And don't forget about your covenant promises with Abraham. And then Mitchell, I think, again, reminded me that there are other translations where it talks about Jehovah relented of the evil that he said he would do, which probably better communicates what happened here rather than the word repented, which is used in the King James and in the American Standard. So you can think of this as kind of a temporary restraining order where God sends Moses down and says, I'm ready to wipe out these people, but you go down there, you see it for yourself, and see what you can do. And of course, he's waxed hot with anger. He's shocked by what he sees, and he breaks the two tablets, appropriately so in some ways, because this just shows you that so quickly they've already violated the basic tenets of the covenant. And they don't get blessings from God unless they're obedient. 3 different times they say, what Jehovah had told us to do, we will do. 3 different times at separate occasions. And then Moses is gone for a few days, and they're afraid he's never coming back. And they lose all their faith and all their character and conviction about sticking through with what they said they'd do. And so he destroys the calf, grinds it into dust, takes that which was sweet to them and makes it bitter. And secondly, he deals with Aaron's sins, as we talked about. And then we dealt with, Aaron's lousy excuses. Then he's got to purge the sin from the camp. So Moses challenges them. He basically says, okay, you've got the golden calf and all this stuff on one side, and I'm back now, and I'm holding up God's banner. And you decide under whose banner you're going to remain with. And it appears that the only people that initially came to the side of Moses is the sons of Levi. And so Moses says, okay, they've committed this public crime, they won't listen, slay those who are still willful and in the camp. And so they go about, these are their own brothers here, their own cousins, their own relatives. Every man took a sword to his side. Many of them perhaps were still in the act of adultery, and he just starts slaying them. And so finally, when people realized that there were serious consequences, the sinning and the idolatry stopped. And it was because of the Levites who sacrificed their own brothers. I'm sure that was difficult for them to do. And so Moses says in the book of Deuteronomy that is why God said, because you've done this, I'm going to give you a blessing. He says, you're not going to have land like the rest of your siblings, but your inheritance shall be the children of Israel themselves. You're going to be 48 cities in their suburbs. You're going to be spread out all around them, and you're going to be my priest. And you're going to wield the sword in offering up sacrifices on behalf of the people, and taking the people's sacrifices and often offering them up to me on their behalf. So that's why the Levites got the priesthood, is because at this moment they were the ones who stood up and were faithful. And Moses makes that clear in Deuteronomy. So, how many people died at the giving of the law, as we said? 3,000, in contrast to the 3,000 that were made alive. All right, so notice Moses' prayer here. Alas, the people have committed a great sin, and they have made a god of gold for themselves. But now, if you will forgive their sin, and my American Standard Bible has something that I don't believe is found anywhere else in the Bible, Old or New Testament. There's just a long line, like a dash, in my Bible. Some translations don't have that. Anybody know why they just have a long line there? Why the translators would have done such a thing?
In the editing, it's a pause of thought. Pause your thoughts.
Okay, there's a big pause because, it says the newspaper man, thank you. There's a big pause, that's true, but the Hebrew idiom is so overwhelming with emotion that there is not an English word that translators can find to properly express the depth of grief mixed with anger and tremendous emotion, usually with tears, that this particular Hebrew idiom expresses. And so because they can't really come up with a word or phrase that really is analogous to what that Hebrew idiom has, they just put a long line there. It's just trying to illustrate by emphasis how difficult and hard this is for Moses because of basically what he says next. And what does he say next? But now, if you will forgive their sin, he's just overwhelmed with emotion. He's saying, please forgive their sin. And if not, if you choose not to, please blot me out from your book which you have written. He's talking here about the book of life, right? What in the world is Moses doing here? What is he telling God? Yeah. Basically, he says, I'm willing to go to hell and lose my soul if that's what has to happen to save these people. Wow. Some of the commentators say that he's basically saying, if you're going to send them to hell, if you're going to blot them out and take their name out of the book of life because of their constant sins and refusal to have faith and to be moral and to be the holy people you've called them to be, then even though I've tried my best to be your son and holy, I'd rather go to hell with them than to see them lost. What I'm about to say is kind of embarrassing for me, but I think I'll just be transparent about this. There's nobody in this world that I love more than my wife, Gail. And I have no doubt, and I think she knows, that if I could save her life by running ahead and stepping in front of a bullet that was aiming for her and take it for me so she could be saved, I do that without even giving it a thought. I hope we all have some people that we would die for if it was necessary to save their life. But what is talked about here is on a whole different level. I mean, this is saying you're willing to give up your soul, go to hell for eternity for another person. I'm not willing to give up my soul for anyone, including Gail. We talked about this years ago, and she said, well, don't feel bad. I wouldn't give up my soul for you either. And I said, I wouldn't want you to. Maybe one day I'll grow so that I'll have that kind of sacrificial spirit toward others. But I'm not quite there yet. But Moses was. And I just did not want to rush through this at the very end of our class 2 weeks ago. I just think this is really serious stuff. In Psalm 106, verse 23, the psalmist says, therefore he said that he would destroy them had not Moses, his chosen one, stood in the breach before them to turn away his wrath from destroying them. So here he is, rushing out, knowing what God's wrath could have justly done, but instead putting himself out there and saying, for my sake, if for no one else's, please save these people. Don't do this, even though they deserve to be destroyed. Give them another chance. He'd already given them 9 chances, and this was the 10th. Wait just a minute, Bob. So what was God's answer? The Lord said to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot him out of my book. I'm not going to even listen to this request, Moses. You're my friend. You're my adopted child. No, I'm not going to accept this. But he's so moved by what Moses is willing to do for these people that he relents at doing what he had considered to do and what they deserved. Okay, Bob, go ahead.
I was just wondering if Moses felt like, he failed God because the people were so disobedient all the time.
Perhaps. I don't think that would be a fair assessment. This isn't on Moses, this is on them. But, some people do a really good job of modeling good behavior and teaching their children, yet they still rebel, and oftentimes they have a lot of guilt that I don't think they should have, but nonetheless they do. And so we're sort of back to what I asked before. Why could God not accept the sacrifice of Moses or this request? Because he wasn't Jesus. Yes, Jen.
About Moses sacrificing himself or saying, take me out of the book of life, don't we kind of get the idea that he was sort of an impulsive guy? He was very emotional, and I'm just wondering if he really did think that through because he was so impulsive. Back in Exodus when he begs God, please don't send me, I just get that feeling from the get-go that that's just his personality. And so I'm curious if maybe he didn't really think that completely through, and it was just kind of an impulsive act, begging God to intercede.
Well, I don't think we'll ever really know for sure, but that Hebrew idiom indicated this was filled with such emotion that he was very serious about what he was saying. And at least at the moment, he meant it, even though it might have been based on impulse because he felt kind of desperate. Ellie, did you have your hand up too?
I think this might be the reason why God didn't punish Aaron, because it says that Josephus talks about how the people chose him. An inquiry went out to choose who was going to be their priest, and it was because Aaron, they were so willing to submit to him and believe that he was a righteous, the best person for the job, and they testified of his virtue and all of that. And it says, this one part of Josephus says that Moses said to them that, he said, and indeed, an inquiry after such a person to minister sacrifices, to pray, offer up prayers for us, and indeed, the inquiry after such a person been left to me, I should have thought myself worthy of this honor, both because all men are naturally fond of themselves, and because I am conscious of myself that I have taken a great deal of pains for your deliverance. But now God himself has determined that Aaron is worthy of this honor and has chosen him for his priest, as knowing him to be the most righteous person among you. So something about the way Aaron, his relationship with the people, the same commitment he had to them that Moses had to them, something like that, something about that touched his heart, I think it could be.
Yeah, that's interesting. Of course, that's not an inspired quote. So...
It's what Josephus, yes, it's not.
Yeah,
it's not inspired. It's just history.
Yeah. And perhaps, certainly Aaron did a lot of good, but this was by far not his finest moment. Who else? Go ahead, Brad. You guys be thinking about this while the microphone comes to Brad.
Just in context, if I'm not mistaken, I was going back, trying to think through the journey that Moses has taken up to this point. And it began with the burning bush.
Yeah.
And it's the same mountain, isn't it? If I'm not mistaken, Mount Horeb, where he appears to him in the burning bush.
Yes.
We're now at the same mountain again.
Yeah, he says, I'm going to take you back to this
And
mountain.
this will be a sign, right? As Moses is in this infancy of his relationship with God and this assignment and mission now, this calling that Moses has, and all the doubt that Moses has, he sees God and the grace and the empathy of God wanting to have mercy on his people and deliver them out of Egypt. And this is the calling. And he says in verse 12 of chapter 3 that this will be a sign to you that I am with you, that when you bring the people back out, you will worship me at this mountain. Look at the whole mission and what he's gone through. He's seen God in that context of delivering his people. He now sees God in a whole different, fashion as he's appeared on the mountain, up front and close and personal. And he's seen a whole nother dimension of God, which is now justice, which is demanded, which he didn't necessarily see that at the beginning, at the burning bush. So he is like just being engrossed in this relationship now of who God is. What a contrast to go from delivering all my people to now having them destroyed. You could see how he would be in this position. I don't know if I look at this verse quite the same way, literally, as to what, like Jen says, what he's saying in that case. Other than the enormity of, he stands in between. How can this be that I've been called for this purpose? It's almost a little bit selfish in a way. How could I be called for this purpose, be dedicated to this whole mission of delivering the people for you, only to have them perish? Mm-hmm. I mean, what good is my life at this point?
Yep.
My whole identity has been wrapped in it. So it's sort of a lesson of being engrossed with his mission and being at a point of being so dedicated to that anything that would be complete juxtaposition of that now is just beyond me and my thinking. What use am I? I am but dead in your sight at this point, kind of thing.
Yeah, interesting perspective. Thank you, Brent. Very well said. Let me close with this. Is there someone else in the New Testament who made a similar statement and who said that he would be willing to lose his soul if by doing so he could save his people? Yeah. Look what Paul says in Romans 9. He says, I have great sorrow and unceasing grief in my heart, for I could wish that I myself were accursed. I think the King James says, made anathema, separated from Christ for the sake of my brethren, my kinsmen according to the flesh, who are Israelites. In other words, I know it wouldn't do any good, but I love my fellow Israelites so much, my Jewish brethren, that if I could become anathema, and in so doing I could bless all of them and they could be saved, I'd be willing to do that. Now, who brought the gospel to the Gentile world and went through great suffering in so doing, but had such great impact? Paul loved these people he was trying to save, though many of them reacted to him with stoning. It didn't stop the love he had for their souls. And he could relate to them because he was once one of them. In fact, he was a persecutor right along with them. Jesus had his soul snuffed out at Calvary for 6 hours when he becomes the sin bearer, and darkness falls upon the face of the deep, and God has to leave his presence from him because he's become sin, and God is lighting in him is no darkness at all. So Jesus, at least for a time, suffered spiritual death at Calvary. Why? Because of his love for us, even though we didn't deserve it. I wonder if we would all be a lot more successful at reaching the lost if we had that kind of sacrificial love for the people that are out there that need Jesus so desperately. I'm not there yet. But Paul got there. And Moses was there. And it's the ultimate Christ-like attitude. Okay, I hear the kids back there were a little over time. Thank you for opening your heart to me tonight and sharing what you did. And I'm going to share a little bit with you more about the tabernacle next time, and we'll get into the first half of Leviticus. Look at that handout, and we'll go up to chapter 14, Lord willing, next Wednesday night. God bless you. Thankful you're here tonight.